All right. Hello, Los Angeles. Hello, California. Hello, America. Hello, world. Thank you for tuning in. This is Politics with Roger. I'm Roger. This is our weekly news summary program. We like to kind of summarize the politics and the news of the week from a couple different perspectives, from the corporate media and independent media. We try to outline what people are talking about and try to bring it to you in a condensed package for those of you who are busy and don't have time to watch a lot of news. Today is Friday, December 15th. It is about 2:30 in Los Angeles, and we will just dive right in. Again, thank you for joining us. Breaking down today's program into three categories. We're going to talk about the corporate media and the Democrat Party and what they've been up to. We're going to talk about the moves that Donald Trump's government is making, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between cultural Marxism, something that we've talked about here in the past, government corruption, and also corporate fascism, also known as crony capitalism. And we'll just point out some news stories that kind of illustrate the points that we're making and fall into one of these three categories. So diving right in, we saw the Democrat Party and the corporate media basically, I mean, it's no secret that they've been working together for a generation now. But what I would say is that we are starting to now see what we were calling fake news morphing into something even more extreme, which I will describe as weaponized media. And what I mean by that is just the demonization is being ramped up. You see the hate being ramped up. You saw censorship being ramped up until a decision in our government with the FCC, but we'll get to that in a moment. And basically, the Democrats and their allies in the corporate mainstream media have got the dial turned all the way up. They are throwing everything at us. Us being the liberty movement, the Make America Great Again movement, the libertarian movement, whatever you want to call it. This is the battle that's taking place. The nationalist movement versus the globalist movement. It's not just taking place here in America, but it's taking place all over the world. So, the top story this week, of course, was the senatorial race in Alabama with Roy Moore versus Doug Jones, the Democrat. You saw Jones defeated Moore in a squeaker, and you saw the what preceded that was just a orgy of glee from leftist media and Democrat voters. And in the weeks leading up to it, again, you saw that the dial was all the way turned up. Demonization programs against Roy Moore. And let me just say here, Roy Moore was accused of not very flattering things, dating young girls under 18. And I'm not dismissing any of those accusations, but we never did see any proof of that. And, the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see what happens to these accusers now that the election is over. Last week we talked a little bit about one of Roy Moore's accusers with a forged yearbook. And anyway, kind of like Herman Cain, if you remember the election season of 2012, where a bunch of women came out and accused Herman Cain of sexual harassment only to disappear as soon as Herman Cain was no longer running for president. I would suspect the same thing is going to happen with Roy Moore's accusers. But the point is, the Democrat media, the mainstream media, that they didn't let that stop them, calling Roy Moore a pedophile, not even accused pedophile, just saying that he was a pedophile, and basically trying to paint the entire Republican Party as a party that supports pedophilia and all this other kind of nonsense. And we always point out that there's double standards that are easy to point to easy to demonstrate when discussing with the mainstream media and their standard when it comes to a Democrat and Republican. I'll throw something out there, and it's not right to say that if Roy Moore, the accusations against Roy Moore were true, and I'm not even sure if that's the case at this point. Comparing those to, for example, what we already know about Joe Biden, and I would suggest look at a YouTube video or maybe a net search on YouTube. Joe Biden molests children. You'll see a trove of very questionable behavior by the former vice president. And the reason I bring this up is because no one ever talks about it, particularly in the mainstream media or in the Democrat Party. You've seen since the outing of Harvey Weinstein and his sexual harassment, sexual assault activities, and by the way, we don't even know the half of it going on there. You've seen the mainstream media go on a PR campaign to basically turn everything into sexual harassment, even clumsy normal behavior between men and women, and try to conflate actual rape and assault with normal behavior. And this is done for political angles, kind of like what was done in the Alabama race. And again, not dismissing the accusations against Roy Moore, but on a scale of 1 to 10, we're comparing apples and oranges in a lot of cases. So the Democrats did win. Another element of this story, and it's a huge element, is the fraud that was involved. And I don't mind accusing at all the Democrats of fraud because they've admitted to it. Maybe I'll just read a few headlines. Project Veritas broke a story before the election season. Democrat operative explains voter fraud. We've been busing people in for 50 years. That has not stopped. That's what voter ID, the voter ID issue was all about. Basically allowing non-citizens or illegal voters not the right, but they're able to vote and have their votes counted. You saw in this particular election in Alabama over 22,000 write-in votes, which is an enormous amount of write-in votes. But even more, I mean, if you really dive into this, there's all sorts of red flags in this. Another headline for you. In final order, court rules that Alabama can destroy digital voting records after all. This was a decision made just before the election. When we're talking about digital records, by the way, you could save, there's no reason to destroy them. You could save it on a thumb drive or zip drive. It doesn't, it's digital. It doesn't take up any space. But immediately those records were destroyed to prevent any kind of recount or to prevent any kind of investigation after the fact. The mainstream media came out and said that black women came out and voted for Roy Moore. They said that Republicans came out and wrote in against Roy Moore. And I would say that's both cover for non-citizens and illegal voters voting in the election, and also citizens or maybe non-citizens being bussed in from out of state. This election reeks with fraud, reeks with election theft, and nothing is going to be done about it moving forward. And part of it is because the Republican Party, the former establishment Republican Party, and even some in the new movement, they did not want to defend Roy Moore because of the accusations. I would suggest they've been bullied out of it. But we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It made them uncomfortable in some cases, and people just did not want to fight that fight. So Roy Moore will be left hanging, even though I'm positive that he won the election, and the election was taken by fraud. But this is the way it goes sometimes, and maybe in the end this won't be a bad thing, because I do think the president and the current DOJ under Jeff Sessions knows that the fraud is occurring. And why they're not acting yet, I don't know, but I know not to, after watching this president for 1 year, I know not to jump to conclusions too fast, because he oftentimes, I would say one of his tactics is to either play possum or to give his political opponents enough rope to hang themselves with. But the Democrat Party and their allies in the mainstream media, they went all out in this election cycle. They threw everything, including the kitchen sink, into Alabama, and they were able to pull off this victory. So moving forward, I would expect to see them emboldened. They will continue the campaigns of demonization, and we'll just have to keep an eye on this. And also the voter fraud will continue moving forward. So that's what we had going on there. Moving on to the Russian collusion conspiracy, which has been completely collapsed, but is still part of the mainstream media narrative. You still see them putting out stories, not even trying to keep the scandal alive. They're just really trying to save face. This week, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was testifying in front of Congress. I would encourage you to net search Jim Jordan's cross-examination of the Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And also Trey Gowdy was very effective in his cross-examination. Basically, at the heart of all this is violations of the Hatch Act, which forbids operatives in the Department of Justice, or specifically the executive branch, from getting involved in political, just political operations because of the not just the appearance of a conflict of interest, but because of the obvious conflict of interest when you have law enforcement arms of our government working on behalf of one campaign against another. I mean, that should be obvious to most. I know it's obvious to everyone watching this program because you guys are smart. You know, there's in question this week was a bunch of texts that were being sent between Peter Strozik, and I always pronounce his name wrong, an operative in the DOJ or FBI. Basically, one of the operatives that was responsible for the fake dossier. We talked a little bit about that last week. Basically admitting through text with other people that you know, he was out to get Trump, which isn't news for just about anybody watching this broadcast. But it's all coming to the light, and the Russian collusion conspiracy is now almost completely, I mean, it is completely collapsed. It's a dead story. It's going to go away. But what you won't see is you won't see retraction. You won't see apologies. We're just going to get into the next phase of the demonization, because that's how our mainstream corporate media complex works. It's not news. It's not even fake news anymore. It's weaponized media. So what is the next? What is the next step, and what are we going to encounter next? Well, last week I told you that one of the cards they want to play is that Trump is ill and Trump has Alzheimer's and this kind of thing. Doesn't look like they're rolling that out too much, although you see sometimes comments being made in leftist media trying to set that up. But what we're anticipating, and what we've seen a little bit, is the next thing is that there's going to be a slew of women coming out and basically accusing the president of some kind of misconduct of some kind. Getting ahead of this story, we saw Bill O'Reilly on the Glenn Beck show say that he has tapes, and I don't know if that's just audio or video or both, of women being bribed by operatives in our government to come out and testify against the president. So it is an information war. You know, mainstream media is not going to report these kind of stories unless they're absolutely forced to. But this is what the independent media is talking about, and this is what I think is coming next, all on the heels of all this sexual harassment, not conspiracy, but sexual harassment narrative and trend that we're seeing. You know, there's and you see people from Congress still dropping every day for accusations here and accusations there. Al Franken was what I would call a sacrificial lamb to the Democrat Party. They wanted to throw him out so they could say, see, you know, we have standards and the Republicans don't because Trump won't resign. All of it political. And again, and all of it unfortunately conflates with real sexual harassment, real rape, real sexual crimes being conflated with normal, albeit clumsy and sometimes ridiculous behavior between men and women. But even that, you know, we're going to see another PR rollout, manufactured news, and I just want to help everyone to try to recognize these things when they come. It's pretty easy to spot them because when everybody in the corporate media is talking about the same thing in the same way, it is a scripted, orchestrated, what we call public relations rollout with a specific political purpose. That's why we call it weaponized media. So watch out, that's coming next. And again, just to review what the Democrat Party and the corporate media was up to, they had Roy Moore, they have the Russian collusion conspiracy that's falling apart, and now they'll move on to Trump and sexual harassment and misconduct with women. In Trump's government, we saw a few things this week with the FCC repealing the Net Neutrality Act. And of course, people went crazy because they said net neutrality is a good thing. The thing is that the bill that the Obama administration called net neutrality actually had nothing to do with net neutrality at all. It had more to do with censorship, or it allowed a lot of censorship. And I can tell you firsthand about censorship and watching conservatives or certain, criticism of Islam, criticism of radical Islam being constantly censored and demonetized on YouTube as another example. You saw these things happening, but Trump this week, or the Trump administration, and the new FCC chairman Ajit Pai, hope I'm pronouncing that right, repealed the Obama administration net neutrality and replaced it with their own. So hopefully, again, we just see more freedom of the press. And if you want to know where I stand on this, I'm always for a decentralization of power, and I'm almost always against any kind of form of censorship, even some of the worst speech possible. I mean, the remedy for that is to ignore it, and move on to other outlets, because we do have a First Amendment in this country. But that was a huge victory, by the way, for the Trump administration and for people who do want to see a free internet and want to see things change, because Twitter has been famous for censorship. Again, oftentimes censoring conservative voices, but we've seen a slew of anti-Trump hate, calls to kill the president, and all this has been acceptable in the eyes of Twitter. The people do not get banned. Roger Stone was completely banned off of Twitter, who's been a very effective operative in the Donald Trump administration. They just threw him off. He didn't threaten to kill anybody. He, again, just, I guess the whole thought about social media, Twitter, Google, YouTube, the counter argument sometimes is, well, they're private companies, they can do what they want, and that's a decent argument to make, and that's a valid argument to make. But at one point, we don't allow utilities, or industries where there's only a few players in the market. I mean, because basically Google, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, they are the internet now. I mean, they're generating almost all the traffic. I guess you'd throw Amazon in there too. They're getting to the point where they're utilities. I mean, phone companies, back in the day when phones existed, landlines, AT&T, ATT, the whole Ma Bell thing, you're going to have to net search that if you want to find out more about it. But the Supreme Court already decided these are utilities. They cannot discriminate against people who want to use a utility. The water company can't say to you, we don't like your point of view, so we're going to deny you service. And internet service is getting to that point, and that's what we're trying to decentralize. That's what we're hoping the new net neutrality laws remedies, because there's been tons of censorship on YouTube, tons of censorship on Google in the sense that net searches were being manipulated, algorithms, to allow whatever they deemed favorable to come to the top of searches, and whatever news that they didn't like, no matter how popular it was, would be buried. Same with Twitter. This is censorship. Big win there in the Trump administration, and then also you have the Trump administration working on tax cuts still. We're going to see what happens in the weeks to come. They're trying to get that done before the end of the year. Trump's economy has been very successful. This in the face of, you got to understand, I'm not sure, and I have to cite this again, the Fed exchange rate, or the Federal Reserve rates, were never increased during the Obama years. In the first year of the Trump administration, I have to go back and double check, or you can for me, they've raised it, I believe, 2 or 3 times already, which normally throws a huge cold blanket on the economy as it is. We've already passed 3% growth after not going over 2% growth in 8 years with the Obama administration, and Donald Trump is eyeing 4% growth in the economy, in the upcoming year. I mean, it's incredible is what it is. But we still have problems in the economy because we doubled our national debt from 2000 to 2008 under George W. Bush, and then we doubled it again. I said billion, I think 4 to 8 trillion. And then we doubled it again, more than doubled it, from 8 or 9 trillion all the way up to 19 trillion in the 8 years with Barack Obama. So the economy was in terrible shape when Trump took over, if you know how to read a balance sheet. And it's still in a precarious position, but 4% growth is just incredible, bringing back the manufacturing base. So they're trying to push through tax cuts. Keep an eye on that. I want to talk for a second again when we talk about government corruption, corruption in the media, and cultural Marxism, the hijacking of language. We had a bomber in New York City, an ISIS bomber from Bangladesh, attempt a suicide bombing at a New York City metro station that failed, thank God. And now the news is how the different media outlets covered it. Famously, CNN was exposed at the same time Fox News was reporting on the failed attempt. CNN was running a story about Donald Trump drinking 12 Diet Cokes a day and why that's a problem, or whatever they're saying about it. I didn't watch the story itself, but think about that for a second. This is why we call fake news. This is why CNN has no credibility. This is why they're just basically an illegitimate news outlet at this point in history, because this is what you get with CNN. Also, you saw other headlines describe the Bangladesh native, the ISIS operative, being described as a Brooklyn man, attempts a suicide attempt. These are the ways that language is manipulated in what we call cultural Marxism to manipulate you, the people consuming this news. It's fake news, and at this point, it is weaponized news. And it's been around for, I mean, this has been going on, as you guys know, for generations. But it's time we start calling it out for what it is. It's weaponized media, and it's an attempt to not just distribute fake news, but at this point, it's to cover crime, it's to cover terrorism, and it's very, very dangerous. It always has been, but it's just getting to a level that's just you know, it's just completely out of control. Moving on, how many of you know that there's been a congressional fund to cover up sexual harassment to the tune of, I think, millions of dollars? Let me just see if I can find a headline quick for you. The Congressional Slush Fund, we call it. Sexual Harassment Fund exposes Congress. That was out of USA Today. Out of Fox News, taxpayer piggy bank lets Congress settle sexual harassment cases in secret. The Hill reporting, Congress owes taxpayers answers about its harassment shush fund, they call it, and so on and so forth. Plenty of articles about that. But the thing is, we've been going through this this environment, this season of sexual harassment and sexual harassment claims. Yet the media has been very quiet overall about this Congressional Slush Fund, Shush Fund, as it was called in the Hill. Well, who has been covered for? Who is guilty of these payouts? Which congressional representatives were covered or used this slush fund? You know, who's guilty and who's paid out hush money? These names have not been released yet. You know, we hear about Roy Moore's accusations, for example. We hear about, I mean, even Al Franken, that I don't want to defend, you know, with that stupid photo of him grabbing a woman that's sleeping. But we're talking about sexual assault in some cases, and probably rape and who knows what else out of this Congressional Slush Fund. And the names are not being released. You would think that every legitimate journalist in the country would want to know about this story and release the data from this slush fund, but you don't hear about it at all. So wanted to bring that up with you guys. Moving forward, I wanted to talk for a second about Amazon and their relationship with the CIA. Again, this isn't new news, but it's important that we talk again about cultural Marxism, corporate fascism, crony capitalism, and basically the relationship between business and government. Basically, and let me back up a step, short history lesson. Corporate fascism, Nazism, basically the scourge of the 20th century was when government, big government, took control of big industry. took control of the means of production through the country, and basically impose whatever rules they want. You see that happening in the United States. We're reversing these trends. This was a big reason why Donald Trump was elected in 2016. People recognize these trends, and you see it all the time. When we talk about Barack Obama's net neutrality, what was going on was government was teaming up, and still is to a great extent, with these players, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, to censor the news that the government did not like, and censor and bury the news that the government did not like, and promote news that they did like. This is an example of modern corporate fascism, quite literally, because you put out a message that the government doesn't like, they censor you through the quote-unquote private sector. Okay, so how many of you know that Amazon receives billions of dollars from the CIA? That the CIA has, let me just read a couple headlines from there. The details about the CIA's deal with Amazon: a $600 million computing cloud built by an outside company is a radical departure for the risk-averse intelligence community. This is back in 2014, by the way, but you've seen it ratcheted up. How the CIA partnered with Amazon and changed intelligence. Now, hey, just a quick question. If the CIA is using Amazon hardware and apparatus to gather intelligence, doesn't that mean Amazon, a quote-unquote private company, has access to that same data? Why, yes, it does. How many of you have an Alexa in your home recording your every word and possibly filming your every move and storing it in what they call metadata? Well, it's not just Amazon getting that information, it's the CIA. So, look, if this doesn't bother you, no problem. Go back to sleep. But every American should be very concerned about this, not just from Amazon, but any company that has this kind of access to your habits, to your, to what you're doing in your home, to what you're saying in your home. Literally everything is being recorded by these apparatuses, and I mean the proof has been out there that the CIA and Amazon is working together on these things. And oh, by the way, Jeff Bezos also owns the Washington Post, which, if you've been following the news for the last couple of years or anything, has been completely anti-Trump, almost exclusively anti-Trump, and certainly what we would say very, very progressive. Again, there's nothing wrong with a media outlet reporting any news that they want. And of course, every media outlet is going to have biases. I admit to my biases right away. I'm an independent journalist, but I'm a libertarian. I did vote for Donald Trump. I do support the Make America Great Again movement. I do support the nationalist movement. I'm very upfront about my biases, and I'm not ashamed of them. And I try to be as objective as I can be, but everybody has biases, so I'm just trying to be open about mine. The Washington Post, who's owned by Jeff Bezos, who's doing business with the CIA, who has all sorts of clandestine dark operations going on in the deep state. That is what we call the deep state. They're not going to be open about their relationships with one another. They're not going to be open about their biases. They're presenting themselves as news, as legitimate, unbiased news. So people need to be aware about this. You need to be aware about this, and you need to make your friends aware about this, because this is crony capitalism. This is how we're walking down the road to corporate fascism, also known as Nazism. And this is the environment we're in. And again, not to cover the FCC story again, but this is why it was so important that Donald Trump got an FCC chairman in there that's trying to break these monopolies. It's shades of Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting all over again, this time in the realm of information and media. Very, very important. Again, this is why we elected Donald Trump, to break up these kind of monopolies, because people saw this coming. Again, another story about cultural Marxism. Hide the kids for this one. Universities and more specifically our Ivy Leagues, and we've seen these kind of stories for a long time. Let me just read a headline to you, and then maybe I'll read a little bit from the excerpt. Princeton, latest Ivy League school to host BDSM tutorials. BDSM, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. Um, so, if you want to go to school or the university, one of our institutions of higher learning, not just any school, but Ivy League schools, well, I guess this is part of the curriculum. And I would suggest, I won't go on a long jag about our universities and how they're owned by the government, of course, and government institutions, and they're promoting cultural Marxism and a debase from what we would call traditional American values very aggressively, including a promotion of transgenderism, global warming, these kind of things, which global warming has been debunked. This is what you can learn. This is what you can look forward to learning now at our Ivy League colleges for the low price of $50,000 to $75,000 a semester. Oh, in addition to hating your own country. Sounds great, huh? Let me just read an excerpt from this story. The student-led club Princeton Plays launched earlier this month after Princeton's student government voted to officially recognize it. It joins Harvard's Munch, Columbia's Conversio Virium, don't think I want to know what that means, and Cornell's Crunch clubs as active student BDSM groups in the Ivy League. Several Sex Week campus events at various high-profile colleges over the years have also included workshops on the sexual subculture, which can include ropes, whips, blindfolds, flogging, master-servant roleplay, and much more. For example, the University of Chicago annual Sex Week observance typically includes a BDSM workshop. In 2014, a presentation there dubbed Taste of Kink, forgive me, gave students an opportunity to explore anyway, I'm just going to stop right there. You can read the rest or pause this video if you want. These are our institutions of higher learning. This is what we describe as cultural Marxism. Now, if I know half of you, or not half of you, not my audience, but if 300 million Americans saw this, probably half of them would go, well, what's the problem? While the other half would be having a response like mine. What the hell? Anyway, this is the problem. This is cultural Marxism, and this is the infringement of it. And, if you didn't know this was going on in our universities, it's not just going on in our universities, it's going on in our Ivy League schools, our highest institutions of learning. And anyway, I think it's a terrible thing. Finally, another story, and this was from Europe, and this has to do with Down syndrome. But the bigger story beyond Down syndrome is eugenics. As you may or may not know, eugenics is about depopulating the world. And you ask, boy, how do we depopulate the world without killing people? And to which I would respond, you don't. Eugenics, anyway, Down syndrome, according to some countries in Europe, and let me just see if I can find this for a second. First, let me read this headline to you. This was from Paul Joseph Watson, Nazi Whispers. On national television in the Netherlands, Dutch government officials tell man with Down syndrome how expensive he is. I encourage you to look up this video, even though it's very, very sad. What you basically have is, I don't know if they're scientists or bureaucrats, explaining to a Down syndrome man, to his face on national TV, how much he costs the government to sustain him. And it's just a very, very sad commentary on humanity. Because they're basically telling this guy, they're telling you cost us a lot. But what they're really saying is, hey, you're worthless, you're a burden to the society, and you and people like you cost us this amount of money. Now, I'll warn you, I'm going to throw up a little graph here, because I know Iceland a couple years ago announced that they had eliminated Down syndrome. Well, they didn't eliminate Down syndrome through medicine or through any kind of innovation. They just killed everybody who they knew had it through abortion. 100% elimination of pregnancies with Down syndrome. And you see this happening all over the world. You see it happening in the United Kingdom, in Denmark, France, and even in the United States. And again, I won't go on a longer jag about this, but if you don't know about eugenics, if you don't know about Margaret Sanger, if you don't know about Hitler's philosophy in purity and eugenics, then you're not going to understand the slippery slope that we're on here. And this also has a lot to do with abortion and the expendability of life. Because once we start killing babies in the womb, then guess who's next? Then it's people with some kind of birth defect. Their words, not mine. People with Down syndrome, people with autism will be next. And you say, well, no big deal. I don't have Down syndrome. I don't have autism. No one I know does. So what do I care? Well, it's only going to be a matter of time before, old people, they're getting to be kind of a burden on our society too. Maybe we should think about cutting it off. That's actually, that debate happened. That's what the quote unquote death panel debate was about while Obamacare was being rolled out and healthcare rationing, which is still very popular in Europe and Canada and other socialist type countries. They do ration health care. If you're old and they decide that society really can't get much out of you, they'll just say, look, here's a pill, they'll take away the pain, but they won't fix your problem. And this whole episode with this Down syndrome person on television being told how much they cost, this is a veiled attempt at promoting eugenics. And that's why I added this story in this week, because we're talking about cultural Marxism, their relationship with the media, and their willingness to promote this kind of bullcrap. Very scary. Don't fall for it, and recognize it for what it is. They're promoting, ultimately, the extermination of this type of person. Which I think if you present it like that to most people, people would agree that's evil, that's wrong. But oftentimes our media dresses it up as something harmless, something cool, something helpful to society. When it's the opposite, it's promoting, again, the termination of a human being with a defect. Terrible. And again, just the last story I just wanted to highlight. Again, about cultural Marxism, we've seen our culture and society promoting transgenderism. First, it started as a civil rights thing. Well, people need to be recognized and this and that. And, a man that thinks he's a woman, we need to call that person a woman because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And this comes from the party of science, by the way, the same party, the Democrat Party, the progressives that said that the other side, the conservatives, the libertarians don't recognize science. The same people who've been beating that drum for 8 years all of a sudden want to call a man, or let me say a human being born with a penis, otherwise known as a male. Well, we want to recognize him as a female because they say in their head that they're a female. Trans or self-identification is a mental illness, and I'll put transgenderism aside. I won't even touch that. If you're born a human being and you think you're a lion, and you act like a lion and you modify your body in ways, you're still a human being. But people who encourage you and say that you are a lion, all they're doing is feeding into your mental illness, and that's what we're seeing here in America. And I'm not even get to why this is all happening. Well, actually, I already did. It's eugenics. It's all an attempt to basically reduce the population by making us a bunch of mentally ill basket cases. And if you think it's not working, I would just say, well, look around. And I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's kind of time to stop just beating around the bush. So I noticed this story today. Entire family turns transgender. An entire family, man, woman, son, and daughter in Arizona, is transgender. The father identifies as a woman. His fiancée, the mother-to-be, identifies as a man. The son considers himself a girl, and, of course, the daughter thinks she's actually a boy. An entire transgender family all under one roof. Hooray! Right? So, you present this article to half the country, and half the country, I shouldn't say half, but a large percentage of this country will cheer this story, will celebrate this story, will promote this story and say this is a great thing. The other half will be horrified. And anyway, I think you get where I'm going with this. We're promoting mental illness, and if we don't start calling it mental illness, these stories are just going to get weirder and crazier, and we're going to get more debased from what we call normalcy. The traditional family, men and women having children, I mean, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but men recognizing that they're male, females recognizing that they're female. I mean, pretty basic stuff. But anyway, cultural Marxism. I want to give you some examples. I think I gave you some good ones, and how the media promotes it in some of these stories. And finally, last and not least, I just wanted to mention Paul Ryan. Back to politics just for a second, talking about retiring. This would be a great thing. He's been a establishment Republican that's been a thorn in the side of the liberty movement, of the Make America Great Again movement. Turned all of the Republican, not all the Republican Congress, but they've had a spirit. They've basically been out since day one to stop the Trump agenda. Paul Ryan, I would say, sold his soul back in 2012 when he teamed up with Mitt Romney and the Bush crony capitalist Republicans, the Bush neocons. And I'm from Wisconsin. I had high hopes for this guy, but he's turned out to be a real jerk. So he's been an ally of the establishment. He's been an enemy of the people. I say that politically, and I hope he does go. I hope he's gone. I think he feels like he might not have a chance at re-election. Whatever the point is, I just wanted to report that because I truly hope this story comes true. Of course, could be a head fake. That happens in politics a lot anyway. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. That was a mouthful. It's December 15th. What do we have coming up? I think we told you about the rollout with more sexual harassment, more fake news, weaponized media. And just be on the lookout now. The media is in full weaponized media mode, where everything coming out of the corporate media is just meant as an attack, is meant to injure, defame, and this is the environment we're in. So keep distributing independent media. If you hate my guts, watch somebody else, but stay on independent media. Stay away from cable TV because, I'm hoping that was able to outline what you would get with that. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week.